Hey everybody, it's Lacey, and as you see, if you're watching on YouTube, not Lauren, today for another episode of the Lawmas Podcast. Instead, we have one of my friends, Aimee Zmroczek, with us today, our guest, I guess, star of this show, because you're gonna run it. I'm so excited. So Lauren can't be with us today. We had set this up late in the day and had some things fall through, and one of her kiddos is sick, and one of her kiddos has a soccer game, and family comes first with us always. So this is, like we said, the Lawmas Podcast, Law Mamas, and I'm going to law with Aimee, and Lauren is just going to miss us this week because she has to mama. So Lauren, we miss you, and we hope you enjoy this episode. So Aimee, I told you we have been reading, where did I put it? I think I put it on my bookshelf. The book Framed. And it was 10 stories, and we only highlighted 6 on our podcast of people who have been exonerated. One of those was actually executed before his exoneration. I don't know if you remember that arson case out of Texas, Todd Willingham. But yeah, so I wanted to talk about Thomas James this week, but then as I was talking to Aimee and kind of thinking about it, actually, Aimee has worked on a case where somebody was exonerated, Gary Bennett, and that's here in South Carolina. So I know a little bit about the case because one of my friends, Amy Lovely, was on the case, and Aimee, that we have here today, jumped on this case as well. And I don't think y'all knew each other before this case. So I guess, I don't know where you want to start, how you got involved in the case, or if you want to back it up to the first trial. You tell me where we're starting with this thing.
Probably how I got involved, and then we can.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I got involved. I'm part of a program. You're a group that I know you're a member of as well, called South Carolina Defense Lawyers Association, Criminal Defense Lawyers Association, and so Aimee and Sarah actually put this kind of help text out there one night, and I saw it immediately, picked up the phone, called, and said, "Hey, sounds like y'all got a mess on your hands. How can I help you?" And so thus began like some of the most amazing friendships and trial work that I have done. So it's funny. You never know what that next contact is going to lead to, but what it led to us was Gary Bennett, and Gary Bennett was
and can I just jump in and say that I think that is just such a woman thing to do. Like I've always said, like whether you have biological children or not, we just have this motherly instinct. And so to see a fellow attorney in need, especially another woman, female attorney team, I think, and that's one of the things we highlight on this podcast. I think that's just such a woman thing to do and motherly thing to do, to jump in and help somebody in a case. And I don't even know that y'all got paid.
We did not.
No. Right.
Yeah, it was all volunteer.
Yeah.
And and it was, a good week and a half long 10-day trial. And the amount of time that we spent in prepping for that was even before, but it was a case that they had taken on pro bono because this man, Gary Bennett, just kept writing them from the jail and saying, "Look, I'm innocent. I am innocent. I didn't do this." My case was overturned on PCR, which is post-conviction relief. Just, it's the kind of the last opportunity for somebody to look at the case and say, "Hey, some things were done that weren't on the up and up. We need to." He needs to have it. He needs to have another trial, and so that's how it got overturned in the first place. So we didn't have anything to do with the.
Do you remember what the issues were? I know one of the things had to have been discovery not turned over by the state. I remember the tapes being an issue in y'all's trial, so I'm assuming that had to be one of the grounds for PCR.
It was really more of a kind of a blanket, what we call a chronic ineffective assistance of counsel, where the attorney just really fails to challenge any of the evidence that they have, and really just does not do a competent job in the adversarial role. And the attorney that he had, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head, and quite honestly, I'm not here to embarrass anyone. It's just he was going through some personal issues as well during that time, and I think that affects his ability to represent, but also that there were some glaring discovery violations that still to this day hardly got resolved, but we were able to prepare with what we had very, very thoroughly. We did our own investigation and really came to learn and believe that it was impossible for him to have committed this crime. And so we took it to trial a second time, and thank goodness the jury, agreed with us and acquitted him of all the charges. It's the second time I've had a case that was overturned on PCR and retried, and the person be acquitted. The first time was a death penalty case, and it was overturned. He got a new trial, and he was acquitted. So he was on death row for 19 years.
Oh my gosh!
And so that's why, like, a lot of times PCRs are just like people like throwing Hail Marys up, but sometimes PCRs are, when they are granted, the right thing happens, because there's one person that could have been executed, and that was Jody Ard, and then with Gary Bennett, I mean, a life sentence is a life sentence. It's not like they get out, it's life without the possibility of parole, and so that's what he was facing until we got the second acquittal from the jury. So.
And for everyone listening, PCR is post-conviction relief, and I talked about that on one of the episodes from the book series. So you can go back and listen to one of the episodes, but in essence, it's designed for people who are innocent. That's why it was originally designed, to try to catch mistakes and errors in the judicial system and give someone a new trial. And if you want to know ins and outs, like I said, you can go on my law firm page. I talk about it, as well as a prior episode. So going back in Gary's case, I know he was convicted originally of murder and then later acquitted. What are the facts surrounding who was murdered? How did Gary know him, if he did know him? Kind of run us through his case.
So this case was it really was a tragic case. When I say tragic, as far as what happened to the victim, because it was a woman named Marie. She worked at a Taco Bell, had befriended obviously the people that work there. I think that's kind of how that happens in restaurant world, and would go and they would do karaoke, or they would go out as a group together, and in that and so the mother of his child worked there. She was also his wife. She's no longer his wife, but still the mother of his child, obviously. But so they worked together at Taco Bell, and so Gary worked with another man who they did kind of like construction, like cleanup, like rental cleanup, when people would rent places, things like that. And so they anyway, so it's a group of people that Gary was kind of in the middle of those two groups, meaning like he and the co-defendant, and when I say co-defendant, he ended up snitching, telling lies, getting a deal. We can talk about that in a little bit, but there was a co-defendant there. So he was friends with him. He also knew Marie, and because she worked with the daughter. So anyway, that's how they all knew each other, this kind of small group of people. And she lived out in a trailer in Socastee, and that is where this took place. So and the timeline was very clear. Once you were able to get the timeline, we actually drove it several times. So she was also so kind. She let Gary and his wife borrow their car to get the daughter to and from dentist appointments, or just to run errands. So she was a very, very, very good human. It was so terrible what happened to her. So, but what happened to her was, Gary had gone and taken his wife to work, and they used Marie's car, and Marie asked him to take home another employee that they had borrowed from a different Taco Bell. And so Gary did all that, and then got back to Taco Bell, gets dropped off. Everybody's going to work. He goes home. He's talking to his neighbor. He's on the phone. His daughter was watching TV. By all accounts, he was a very, very good dad. None of that had ever changed. And then Marie had gotten her car back. And so he had gotten a ride home. So he is at the location now at his house without a car and no ride, and his daughter there. And so that was real key to his timeline as to when this happened, because there were phone calls that were made on a home phone so that we know where he was at certain times. Well, sometime in the middle of the night, someone had gone to Marie's trailer, and either the door was unlocked or she let them in. It's really unclear. The scene was clearly not preserved, and there are witness statements about hearing certain things or hearing people. But the tragedy of it was Marie had gotten home from work. She had changed out of a portion of her uniform. It was on the ground, and she was discovered with her by her roommate, and her throat was slit literally from ear to ear, like
oh my gosh.
like Nicole Simpson's the best way that I can describe it. The room had been completely ransacked, but nothing really of value taken. I mean, but the room was clearly staged to make it look like a burglary. What was so
sexually assaulted?
She was not sexually assaulted. There's no evidence that she was. In fact, her pants were still on, and kind of, it almost looked like she was in the middle of changing. And then it looked like her body was staged on the bed because she somehow slid off the bed. But like I said, it was definitely staged because there was so much stuff, like all the drawers and everything had been emptied on the bed. But when you took off all of those items, the bed was clearly the crime scene. It was covered in blood. There was also blood spatter on this little curtain like I have here. She had one right by her bed, and so we could see the direction that obviously that the blood came out, so the direction she was facing on the bed. So it really did appear that somebody came up from behind her and caused this mark. Really, what was incredibly interesting, there were so many interesting things about this case once you get past the horrific, the brutalness of the crime, because it was very brutal. But the pictures that were taken, and again, this happened in, I think, I can't remember exactly. It was in the 2000s when it happened. But when you look at the pictures and like the crime scene logs and the crime scene evidence, you would have thought this happened in like 1970, because the pictures were literally little Polaroid 3x5 pictures that we had. And so we're just laying them out there. And there were some, like, they never recovered a murder weapon. But one of the pictures of her laying on the ground shows her laying on the ground, and I'm using just my scissors as a prop. There was literally a box cutter right next to her head that they never collected.
Was there blood on it?
To me, it looked like it. I don't know, because they didn't collect it.
Right, it wouldn't have gone to the lab if they didn't collect it.
In the bathroom, there were blood droplets on the ground and some scissors sitting on the toilet that clearly had blood on them. Photographed, never collected.
Oh my gosh.
It was, the things that weren't collected were insane. Then
I don't understand why. Like, that just doesn't make any sense.
There were at least 3 separate items that could have caused that mark. I mean, scissors in general, with enough force.
Right.
And I keep doing it because it was just so vivid to me. But I really, truly, and speaking with some of the jurors afterwards, one of the things that they really focused on was the evidence from that cut. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, but
yeah.
So she's discovered by her roommate. Her roommate had some issues as well. She was friends with somebody and was having relations with people, different men that kept coming in and out, and that she had introduced to her roommate that maybe had some questionable behaviors and things like that. So it's not a great group of people. They all came with issues, and they all came with problems. None of them, Marie never deserved to be murdered. Nobody deserves to be murdered like that. Right. But it was
a rough crowd.
It was, yeah. It just, it was a lot of some of the behavior was explainable. There were some drugs that were found in the house that could have that were not the decedents, the victims. I think that they could have been, through friends with the roommates, so that there were, they didn't have really any suspects or motives at that point. They're trying to talk to neighbors. They talk about different cars being used or being seen in the driveway, and different stories. So somehow it comes just by talking with the people that they're talking with. They say, well, what about people with who she hangs out with at work? So they start to look into that, and the friend, the co-defendant that had hung out with them before, turns out had a very checkered past, was in the Navy, and had killed another woman with, I think, and this was information that was kept out of the first trial. The defense attorney was not allowed to ask the co-defendant about the previous murder charge that he had. And we had to really fight to be able to cross-examine him on that murder charge. I cross-examined him for 7 hours during the trial, but it took us forever to get the judge to allow us to bring that in. And the way that we did it, we got Aimee, of course, Lawrence, lovely, is so resourceful. She got a copy of the plea transcript, a copy of the discovery.
So he pled to this. This was not a dismissed murder.
Right. This was a murder charge that he had 12 or so years earlier.
He must have pled it down.
He did. It wasn't, okay. In different states, they have like murder 2, murder, whatever. Right. So they pled it down. He only got 12 years. And he was let out. But when I looked at the crime and the discovery in particular and compared it with this time, there were, I think, 12 similarities.
Oh, wow.
And our theory was always that the co-defendant, did it. Of course, he jumps to get the deal, and then his story didn't make any sense. All he did was blame Gary.
No, he's never been charged for this.
He was charged. But because he snitched, he got charged, or he pled to accessory after, and did no jail time.
So he was charged with the murder.
He was charged with the murder.
Is this before or after Gary was charged?
They both got charged.
They were both charged together.
Mm-hmm.
So the police kind of hone in on him, and then he
gives a different name.
A bird,
right?
Probably a false tune, and throws Gary under. Wow. Yep.
And like the story that he said never made sense. None of it made sense. And they didn't care because they didn't have anything really on either one of them. And so
they didn't do their job.
Yeah. So they just wanted
no fingerprints, no DNA. You can't do anything because they didn't collect anything.
None. No weapon, no nothing. And and there were clear footprints in the carpet that could have been preserved, and measured. I think none of that was done at the trailer.
Physical evidence that ever tied Gary?
None.
Is there any physical evidence that ever tied his lying co-defendant?
Nope.
Wow.
Nope. But because they got the lying co-defendant to lie, which is exactly what he did, that's all they needed. And
did he ever confess? or what was on these tapes?
Oh, so on these tapes, so the co-defendant so the so messy. The co-defendant had a wife also. That wife was the daughter of a police chief, not in Sockasty, but or maybe he was the police chief of Sockasty, but this was investigated by Horry Police Department. So, but she still had connections to the police department through her dad, and she was married to this co-defendant, and so they once they're arrested, she's like, oh, I want to see him and I want to talk to him. And so the police were video recording all of those interactions. And so the police improperly let her into the interrogation room with the co-defendant husband, and they have sexual relations all on videotape, but at the same time,
but porno made in the jail.
But also they're having a discussion about what to say and what to do, and so we've never actually seen the whole complete tapes because they still have disappeared. Nobody knows where they are, kind of nonsense. But we had enough people be able to testify that they did exist. We did have some tapes that were partially interviews or conversations, but the videotapes are long gone.
So the co-defendant didn't confess in these tapes, but there was impeachment material on them that would have,
and that showed what his motive was, which was to set up Gary just to get him out of all this trouble. And the things that there were so many things that didn't make sense. Just the brutality of this crime, and to have no matching fingerprints, DNA.
Right.
You're gonna, and when you stab someone or cut somebody, the chances of you cutting yourself just on these sharp objects are incredibly high. Which is that's why it's so important to collect anything that could be an object. But the most important, and I think so Aimee's husband Justin is such a great human. And he was so great for us because he kept playing devil's advocate in the case. He's like, but what if he did it? What if he did it? Finally, one day I was able to first of all, the amount of time that it took to get to the different places would not have rendered or left enough time for Gary to have been seen by completely random people that had nothing to do with this case. And for him to have committed this crime, it just wasn't possible. But
now, were those witnesses called in the first trial, and were they called in your trial?
So they were called in our trial, but they weren't. And then this goes back to the PCR being granted. They were not meaningfully challenged. We met with these witnesses over and over and over again to really get their stories down. And not to make sure that they would lie, but just to make sure that what they were saying was consistent with what they remembered from so many years ago.
Right.
And we, the defense, I mean, I ended up calling police officers. We called police officers in our case because they did not want to put police officers up. They spent like a day and a half calling everybody from SLED to talk about how nothing matched the defendant. But the most important part to me was, so when someone is stabbed the way she was stabbed, you can get a lot of information about that. Directionality being the most important part. And
I was thinking that when you were saying it, you could determine if they were right or left, most likely because of the direction of which they were cut. Is what was going on.
And so when someone is cut, if somebody's cut from behind, right? So they're going to use their dominant hand. So if this pencil is me and I'm the person doing the cutting, I'm right-handed. Well, I'm ambidextrous, but I am predominantly right-handed, right? So if, what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter the head or the neck here on this side. So across.
Opposite,
and then
naturally, your dominant hand.
Right. And naturally come across, and for several reasons. One,
unfortunately, we've seen this in the movies and stuff like that.
But also, when that blood comes out, these two veins the carotid arteries are they, they're major arteries that carry blood, and that's how we know the person was behind her, is because there was so much spatter and stuff coming out the front.
Mm-hmm.
But when you do that, you leave a tail. Gary Bennett is left-handed. Their pathologist and our pathologist both agreed that the person who committed this crime was right-handed. And the reason that they were able to determine that is because once you go across, the way that you pull it out, it leaves a tail. The scar leaves a tail, and that's so how you know what goes in and what side it comes out. So that's how they knew that it went in this way and it went in that way, right? So it enters into her left.
Mm-hmm.
It enters in the left side of her neck, and the exit wound, for lack of a better, but the path goes through to the right. And so if I'm right-handed, that would make sense. The co-defendant, coincidentally, right-handed. And he refused to admit that for so long, and maybe hour 5 or 6, I came back to it again, and he got so mad, and he slammed his hand down on the thing, and he grabbed something. He goes, "I have told you, I have answered this question a million." Anyway, I didn't care that he was yelling at me or that he wanted to answer questions, but he did all of that with his right hand. And the jurors said that made such an impact on them. And everybody admitted that Gary was left-handed. So, so at a very simple presentation, like, we knew that he couldn't have done that, with being left-handed.
Right.
But it was just, and you would think that if you took that information to the state, that they would say, "Oh, you're right. Oh, we took that information to the state." They didn't care.
Do you think they genuinely don't care, or that they're trying to save a lawsuit?
No.
Okay.
I think I genuinely think that they don't care about who commits crimes, as long as they can arrest somebody and get a conviction.
Yeah.
I really, and I think that that's particular to at least those groups of prosecutors.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen prosecutors that get to know the victims' families, and they really want to, seek justice and do the right thing for victims. It's easier for me to understand when they take what I consider unrealistic positions, but it's because I know that they're doing it from a place of emotion and general caring. Where with these prosecutors, it's like they didn't care. They didn't care that they made a deal with the devil. They didn't care about any of those things. They just wanted the conviction.
And I remember other Aimee, our friend that we're talking about, that was, pretty much the lead. This was her baby. Lovely Lawrence. She was going to sit down and meet with the solicitors
and she did.
on this case. And she was worried. She's like, "I'm going to show them my whole hand." But she had such faith that they would do the right thing, and I love her heart. And I mean, maybe this has changed her, but, she decided to do it. She decided to go in with all the information to show and prove it. And they didn't care. And that's why it still went to trial. She tried. She tried. She showed her entire cards for trial by doing that. But it goes to show, like you said, they really didn't care.
And it blows my mind, like, because, like, even with, like I said, with Justin, he would go back and forth, and he did not spend the time that we did, but it was so great because we were having to convince him, which eventually we had to convince the jury. And finally, I literally, like, I put him in the car one night, and I was like, "Okay, we're gonna go.
Yeah,
we're gonna go to all the places that we know that we can independently verify." Right. And then we'll see if we have time. And once we did that, he was like, I remember because he was driving, I let him drive. So I wasn't speeding or slowing down or doing whatever. And we get back to the office, and he just goes, "Holy shit, he's innocent." I was like, "Welcome." And this was like day 2 of the trial, by the way.
And these are the police officers' jobs. This is their job to collect evidence. This is their job to investigate. Investigate would have been talking to those witnesses that you mentioned that would have established his alibi. And one of the stories we covered, a man was convicted for killing his wife. They were married for decades. No issues in their marriage. He was at a conference. He was a principal. She was a teacher. He was like 3 hours away at a conference, and they saw him that night. They saw him the next day. His wife was murdered in the middle of the night, and they literally said he drove 3 hours for his conference to kill her and then come back. Yeah. So that is a common theme that we have, or not, that wasn't a common theme, but that's actually one thing we saw in the book. And the police did drive it. They just didn't care. They just didn't care. And it was just complete, I think, tunnel vision, and just trying to appeal. And I do feel like they do want to give the victims closure. And I can't imagine from an officer's perspective, feeling that weight, and have met with victims' families, and I know that they're going to. I promise you, I'm going to do everything I can to find out who did this, and that weight. But you have to still get it right, because otherwise, you're going to contribute to the amount of victims in a case.
Right, and that's the thing, and you just create more victims and more.
Right.
I mean, and more, and more challenges and more problems, and it's, and then it makes me as a defense attorney, when I see it, question everything that they do as officers. Right. And I hate that,
I do. Yeah. Same. So you said that what stuck out to the jury in the second trial. Is there anything else you would want to add to that?
Well, so yeah, I mean, the jurors, I'll tell you, they were really appalled at the state's behavior, and that the state would just rest on that behavior. The fact that, that we had to call
their officers
that they, that, and they knew that we were going to call SLED if they didn't, but the fact that they wasted all of the, I mean, we could have stipulated that there was no, they collected all of this evidence, and then they never ran it through APHIS, which is the National Fingerprint database. They never ran anything through CODIS, which was a DNA database. And, but they did run a comparison against Gary Bennett's, and then it came back that it didn't match. And they're like, whatever. And they felt frustrated that they were wasting the jurors' time with that. And that they just refused to accept these, these real inquiries into whether or not the evidence that they were presenting was factual. And, and in meeting with the witnesses, there was one guy that I felt like could have been a potential witness, because there was a claim that he had been rebuffed by a sexual advance he made on Marie. And they even collected his machete, his grandfather's machete, that had blood on it, but they never tested it. But I talked to that kid. I learned that it wasn't, that the blood, I learned likely where the blood came from. We didn't have it tested because we're not trying to get, we're not able to do a lot of, our own independent testing, especially when we have to do it ourselves. But just the fact that in talking to him and getting an understanding, nobody ever did that, and we put that machete in evidence as a part of the defense evidence to show, look, this is something that they didn't test, and this is somebody that had a problem with Marie, and, and it's not that hard to get it right. And so they were frustrated about that, but mainly, with the co-defendant, his name was Andrew Lindsay, not that it matters, but Andrew Lindsay, once I was able to break him and they saw his temper, which, I mean, it took me a long time. But because he was so trained and so he knew what he needed to do. Right. And, but once I was able to break him and they really got to see his explosive anger, they said that was, I mean, they visibly jumped when he slammed that table and started yelling at me. The jurors visibly jumped and it was, they were so heartbroken that he had done this, I think 18 years is what he had done.
You almost got a mistrial in opening.
I might have. Yeah. So
what did you say?
So my mentor, John Delgado, he has always trained me to push the envelope, always, always, always. And I was struggling with my opening because it is so important. And, but these jurors were,
We're talking about an opening statement for anybody knows. It's not evidence, it's just our perception. So this is what Aimee's talking about.
We out there always say it's a guide for what the evidence will show, but blah, blah, blah. But I mean, what the evidence was going to show, and just looking at the pictures alone, like I said, it was clear that this case had some age on it, right? And I said that something along the lines of, we're here because the Supreme Court said he didn't get a fair trial the first time. And the prosecutor went crazy ballistic. But I needed to explain that gap. And I was like, John, am I going to get in trouble for this? He's like, I mean, you're not going to get in trouble. You'll probably get objected to, which I did. But at least it was out there. The jury got to understand that.
Why the Polaroids were coming in.
Yeah, why we were having, these things from, in like cassette tapes, when now everything is digital and CDs and things like that. And so, I think that, so he encouraged me to do it. I'll tell you, I was glad I did, because one thing that I've learned, and I try to talk to a lot of juries, because we always get feedback, win or lose. I like to talk to them, say, hey, what could I have done differently? Or what, please don't just, oh, you did a great job. Those aren't the kind of comments I'm looking for. I'm looking for the, what can we do better? And these jurors, though, really enjoyed the demonstratives that we used, the the thoroughness and the time that we put into it. It made a difference to them.
Yeah, absolutely. So altogether, how much time, as we wrap up, did Gary spend in jail?
A total between pretrial and then his sentence, he was in for 18 years. And so
he missed his babies growing up.
So when he was, missed his daughter. Still trying, now that he's out, he's trying to, one thing that I've really learned about both Gary and Jody, the two people that I had in there the longest, is they become so institutionalized. It's really its own form of PTSD. Like when Jody got out the first day, Jody called me at 6:30 in the morning. And he was like, can I go to the shower? Can I go to the bathroom? And I'm like, I don't care what you do,
Right.
Because they don't know how to learn.
They're not used to not having, doing something without permission.
Mm-hmm.
How is Gary? I know that y'all went and saw him after the trial a couple months and visited him. How is he?
He's good. He's back in Myrtle Beach area. He is actually doing real well. Is playing pickleball.
Good. I love that.
Oh yeah, he's real big into that, and still golfing, and has gotten in with some groups. He was a veteran, so he's gotten in with some veteran groups that have really helped him kind of live a stable and much just more structured life, which I think is really good for these people. He, I know that he does try to offer some counseling to some, friends or people that he met in the detention center to not make bad choices. He was no angel, right? He made some bad choices in his life, but murder was never one of them.
Right.
And he is slowly building a relationship back with his daughter, who is grown now. And so that's, that he lost all that time. And so, but I think that, most importantly, he's not gotten in any trouble, and because, I think people just get so fearful that, oh, well, what if, and it's just such a dangerous way to live, and I that what if gets so many people convicted when they really, really shouldn't be. And that's, I think, what we struggle with as defense attorneys,
Yeah. Sorry, one quick question before I'll let you go. The first murder for the co-defendant, how did the victim die?
She wasn't stabbed, but she was strangled. And
it was injury.
Strangled across the neck. The way that the scene and the body were disposed of, there were similarities. Like I said, the concentration,
Yeah.
there were 12 very, very interesting connections, and I'll tell you that's the one thing, especially that I hope that people understand, that, there are snitches and there are cooperating co-defendants, and there is a difference between the two. A snitch is somebody that will lie or say whatever they need to do to get out of trouble. A cooperating co-defendant is somebody that, accepts the responsibility of what they did and tell the truth. And I think that the jury should, when they're just weighing the credibility of that type of evidence, that should come with such a higher scrutiny, because
I agree.
The fact that he got up there and was, allowed to say all this when he had the past that he had, and they didn't even know about it, it just, I just hope that when people watch this, or they hear things on the news, or hopefully when they get to be a juror, that they take these things with a huge grain of salt.
Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, in closing, some of the things we saw in the book is we couldn't believe some of the things jurors actually believed and used to convict people. Mm-hmm. So I hope that this podcast, and especially this series, has helped everyone listening, because we could all be potential jurors on a case one day, and it deserves our full attention. We talk about the importance of voting, but then everybody wants to get out of jury duty. Yeah. And, people ask me, how do you get out of jury duty? And honestly, I take offense to that. Because to me, I think jury duty is more important than voting, and it is affecting people's lives around you. So thank you, Aimee. I definitely learned so much, and I think a lot of this, like I said, ties into some of the themes that we've talked about in our series. And an attorney friend of ours, that's a mutual friend, one time said that they look out after you because they will make sure you never take on too much, because Aimee is just somebody who wants to always help, as you see in this case itself. In Thomas's case as well, she is just always willing to jump in and help a friend. And I just think you're a badass lawyer and a phenomenal female friend. And I'm so grateful to know you. I love you so much.
Oh, I love you too. You know that.
Thanks. And bye, everybody. We'll see you next week. And please follow us on all our socials. And hopefully we'll have Lauren back next week. Bye.